Julia opened the door, pulled 2 heavy bags of groceries into the apartment, and leaned tiredly against the wall. "Julia, where the hell have you been? When are we going to have dinner? I'm very hungry." A yawning husband Brian came out of the room. "Mommy, Mommy!" 6-year-old daughter Maria rushed toward her. "I was playing outside with my friends today, and I fell. I hurt my palm, and it hurts a lot. I also got all my clothes dirty," said the girl, pointing to the scratched palm. "Brian, did you treat Maria's wound?" "How am I going to treat it? I have no idea how to do this. I'm not a doctor." "Brian, can you at least unpack the grocery bags while I take off my jacket and treat Maria's wound?" "Sure, this is something I can do." Julia's life was an endless cycle of chores and burdens. She couldn't remember the last time she took some rest, not counting sleep. Only the first 7 years of her life were happy for Julia. She lived with her parents in a small town. She had a wonderful family. But everything changed when her mother died. 4 months later, her father married Janet, explaining such a quick marriage by the fact that it was difficult for him to cope alone with the child and household chores. The stepmother was quite nice to Julia at first, but obviously, Julia could not find the kind of love that her mother gave her. But the girl accepted Janet and felt very fond of her. Janet's attitude towards Julia completely changed when her father and Janet had a child together, their son Lucas. Since then, Janet began to make a clear distinction. Lucas is her child, and Julia is someone else's child. Thus, Julia became a stranger to the woman she was about to call her mother. 2 years later, Julia had another brother. The girl adored both of her brothers and loved to babysit them. "If you don't wash their dirty underwear, you won't play with them, because you are slacking. All the dirty work is on me, and you only have fun with them," Janet said sternly. Julia did not refuse. If she had to do the laundry, she dutifully did it. Julia was 12 when Janet came out of maternity leave. Since then, all household chores, laundry, cleaning, cooking, seamlessly shifted to her fragile child's shoulders. Also, Julia had to take her brothers to kindergarten in the morning before school and pick them up in the evening. Endlessly helping, pleasing, caring. Julia was so used to it that she took it for granted. She didn't know a different kind of life. Since she was 15, all Julia's classmates started going to discos and parties. Julia was the only one who didn't go anywhere. She had no time for it. She spent all her evenings doing household chores. The girl realized that in this life, she would have to achieve everything on her own. She did not expect any support from her family. Julia studied well and dreamed of enrolling in a university in a big city. Julia graduated from high school with honors. The girl did not expect such a high result from herself, yet her self-esteem was low. When her stepmother found out that Julia was going to university in another city, she made a scene. "Do you think your father and I are going to support you for the rest of your life? Are you really going to waste 4 years studying at university? I graduated from high school and immediately started working in a factory. Do you know why? Because I had a conscience, unlike someone else. My parents had 3 of us. I was the eldest, and I understood that I had to help my family, not get diplomas." "Janet, but that was many years ago. It was a different time. And now you can't achieve anything without a university education," Julia answered. "You're going to work at the factory. Don't even try to argue. There's a line operator position open right now, and you don't need any education. And if you want to study, go to a local college. Look at her, going to another city, wanting to get rid of her clothes and burdens." Janet continued to scold. "Dad, why aren't you saying anything?" Julia couldn't hold back her tears. "What can I say, sweetie? Janet is right. Well, if so, then I'll go to the Capitol, Julia shouted and ran out of the house. No one took Julia's words seriously. Julia had never shown her temper before. But when she came home and started to pack her bags, Janet realized that she was about to lose such a hard-working housemaid. Don't bother coming back home. Do you hear me? If you don't pass your exams, stay there in the Capitol and don't ask for money. If you won't listen to us, then you are on your own, her stepmother shouted. Janet hoped that Julia would be frightened, come to her senses, and stay. But Julia resolutely stepped out of the house and left for the Capitol. Julia easily entered the University of Economics. She decided to follow in her mother's footsteps and become a financier. Julia studied and worked part-time in the evenings. It was hard, but she had no other choice. Her fellow students, partying every night, invited Julia with them at first, but then they decided that she was some kind of strange, unfashionable, and it was better to stay away from her. Julia, don't you have parents? You always try to get any part-time job, and you don't have any free time for yourself, Julia was asked by her fellow students. Girls, I have parents, but they have 2 more children besides me. It's not easy for them. The salaries in our town are low, and I'm an adult now. I made the decision to leave, so I have to take care of myself. Julia, you should at least buy yourself some clothes. You're wearing some rags. This is the capital city, after all. I'll have to go through my closet and give you some of my old clothes. It'll still be better than anything you're wearing. Thanks, but no need. When I get a full-time job, I'll buy myself some new clothes. I can't keep up with fashion right now. In her 3rd year at university, Julia transferred to part-time study and got a job as an accountant at a big company. There, she met Brian, who was 10 years older than she was. Brian was pedantic, neat, and too by the book. He learned a dozen clever phrases, and with that, he completely won the naive Julia over. Julia learned that Brian was divorced and had a son after the marriage application had been filed. Brian lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment, which he inherited from his grandmother. The fact that her mother-in-law visits the apartment every day and makes her own rules there, Julia encountered only after the marriage. Brian did not stay at any job for more than a year, because his mother kept telling him that his company was not deserving of his talents. By the way, Brian listened to his mother in everything. He listened and did not argue. Facing the realities of her new family, Julia wanted to leave Brian, but she found out she was pregnant. Where would she go with the baby? She certainly couldn't go home. Janet wouldn't let her, and she laughed at her. She'd rather be here with a mean mother-in-law and a mama's boy husband. Brian's ex-wife often brought their son to them. You don't work, you don't pay child support, then let our son live with you, she would say, and leave the child for a few days, sometimes for a whole week. Leave him, you fool. Leave before it's too late. You could find yourself a decent man a long time ago. You're a pretty girl. Well, maybe you don't dress very fancy, and you should take care of yourself. Look at your head. Is that a haircut? What about your eyebrows? You should do something about them too, she said to Julia. Julia had no time to take care of herself. Brian had no job for 6 months. Julia went to school, cooked, and cleaned the apartment. She cleaned not only their apartment, but also her mother-in-law's apartment on Saturdays. Her mother-in-law's knees were sick, and she could not do the housework. She decided so herself. And Julia, with dark circles under her eyes from fatigue, could and should do everything that her mother-in-law commanded. Helping, pleasing, caring. This is what Julia encountered in her new family as well. Brian, you spend all day at home. Why can't you at least go grocery shopping? But I bought some last time. You scolded me. You said I bought some crap. I took out the trash today, by the way. I even washed the dishes for our kids. Did you look for a job? Of course. Do you think I spend all day doing nothing? I went to a job interview today. It's not a great job. Brian, you should get any job. You should make at least a little income. You know, I'm not going to get the unworthy job. I won't sell my labor for a small price. Julia was tired. She was incredibly tired. Julia recalled Kelly's words that she needed to take care of herself, and she decided that it was enough. On Saturday, Julia didn't go to her mother-in-law's to do her housework. Julia went to get her hair cut. Then she went to the store and bought new boots. The boots she wore had already been repaired 3 times and were in terrible condition. The next day, her mother-in-law came. She saw the haircut and the new boots, and a quarrel broke out. "What did you waste the money on? Do you have any conscience? I help your family with the money I allocate from my pension, and my pension isn't much, you know. I spent my money, my own money that I earned. I'm sick of supporting your son. I've had enough." Julia didn't expect such courage from herself. "What a selfish, brazen girl you are. Do you really dare talk to me like that? Maybe you're going to leave?" "Yes, I'm really going to leave." "And where will you go, dear? Will you go back to your little town?" "If I have to, I'd rather go back to my little town, but I won't stay here." The next day, Julia was not herself at work. She gave the chief accountant a report with a lot of mistakes, which had never happened before. "Julia, come to my office," the chief accountant called her. Julia was afraid that now she could also lose her job, but Mrs. Smith, the chief accountant, was a kind, understanding, and sympathetic person. "What happened, Julia? What is wrong with the data? I didn't expect to get such a bad report from you. I was going to make you my deputy, but now I have doubts that you can handle the job." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Smith. It's just..." "So tell me, what happened?" "It has nothing to do with work. Family problems. I'm sorry. I understand that my personal problems should not affect the work." "Oh, young generation," Mrs. Smith sighed heavily. "Why can't you get harmony and understanding in families? My son has been suffering for a month and a half now. His wife left him. He earns good money, and it was never enough for her. She didn't work anywhere herself. She only went to beauty salons and restaurants with her friends. She didn't want to have kids. She was afraid of ruining her figure, and then she found someone wealthier, and she left. I'd leave too, but I have nowhere to go. I came here from a small town, and I can't go back home." Julia briefly told Mrs. Smith about her situation. Mrs. Smith took a short pause, pondering. "Let me tell you something, Julia. I also moved here from a small town many years ago. Oh, it wasn't easy for me, and I had no place to go back to, so I didn't give up. I believed that I could do it, that I could succeed, and you have to believe in yourself. Always believe in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself, you won't achieve anything. And about accommodation for you, I can't promise anything, but I'll try to help." The conversation with Mrs. Smith encouraged Julia. She had not expected the chief accountant to be such a warm-hearted person. Julia left Brian the same day, taking her daughter with her. Of course, she did not leave without a scene. Her mother-in-law was especially zealous. Julia moved to a small rented apartment. The conditions were not great, but quite bearable. Julia made no more mistakes in her work and got a deputy position. Now, Julia could afford to rent an apartment. 2 months later, Mrs. Smith was celebrating her 30th anniversary as chief accountant. She was given a lot of gifts. Her son Marcus came to pick her up after work with the gifts. Mrs. Smith introduced her son to Julia. 2 days later, Marcus was standing outside the office again. But he did not come to his mother. Marcus wanted to see Julia. Julia rejected Marcus's courtship for a long time. She said she wouldn't get married a second time. Once was enough. But what frightened Julia most of all was that her child might have a stepfather, just as she had a stepmother in her childhood. No, let it stay as it was. She and her daughter were fine together, and they didn't need anyone else. But Marcus didn't give up and continued to court Julia. He waited for Julia's heart to melt. "Believe in yourself," his mother taught him. Marcus believed, and still, he waited. After 2 years, Julia finally said yes, Another year later, Marcus and Julia pleased Mrs. Smith with the birth of their granddaughter, Elizabeth. Marcus and Julia's child from her first marriage had a wonderful relationship, and they became real friends. Mrs. Smith spoiled her granddaughter Maria too, treating her as if she were her own granddaughter. 6 months later, Julia's father called to her for the first time in years. He asked her to come and help. Janet was very sick. Their sons had also left and were in no hurry to help their own mother. Marcus took Julia and Maria to her hometown, and little Elizabeth stayed at home with Mrs. Smith. This was the first time Julia's father saw his older 10-year-old daughter. Julia got Janet into a good clinic in the capital. Julia had no hard feelings towards either her father or her stepmother. Julia was happy, and when a person is happy, there is no anger in the soul.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked. We could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. "I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime," he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look, "To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day." Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. "So, you all get a chance." As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. "Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them." It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. "Still here?" Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. "I'm leaving." I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick! What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. "Why is he so angry?" Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike. What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.